everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Today, Queensland, the next lap report. What does it mean for racing in the Sunshine State? A new chairman at Racing Australia, an update on the pattern, and challenges for the greyhound industry. We also chat to Hong Kong-based Mark Newnham about his successes and ambitions. In breeding, the remarkable record of Bob Peters. What does the Aushorse Investor's Guide tell us about Australian racing and breeding? And catalogue galore. And in wagering, the tangled relationship between gambling and racing. Tim, thanks for joining us. As the year works towards its ends, plenty of hot topics to discuss, among them the outcome of the McGrath review into Queensland racing and the government's reply to the next lap. Tim Mando, the racing minister, accepted 79 of the 110 recommendations, but pretty much, I think 26 of them were accepted in principle, only 5 rejected. Probably the most significant was around about the point of consumption tax stuff. But sort of having read through it and had a look through it, Tim, obviously I've analysed it quite extensively on the straight. What did you take out of what you saw, what came out of over the weekend?
Well, aside from the pop tax, recommend or dismissal of the recommendation there, I guess not focus on night racing. Queensland's already been sort of at the forefront of that for a long time with Toowoomba and Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast. But it sounds like they could have night thoroughbred racing from Wednesday to Saturday. So they're really focusing on that and talking to other PRAs. That's particularly Racing Victoria. The data shows that people punt more at night or, after work and probably in the pubs and things like that. So obviously that's where the McGrath review saw some upside. From me, what was interesting, I did listen to an interview with a trainer up North Queensland, Peter Rowe, no relation as far as I'm aware, suggesting that Cairns would be a good place for night racing up there. Whether that's commercially acceptable or sensible, I'm not sure. It has been mooted before, but he sort of campaigned for that, but that wasn't part of the review that I saw anyway, that it could be moved up, sort of have a night venue up in the north of the state as well, which, Cairns would make sense, but whether, as I said, whether you could justify the infrastructure cost to get that over the line, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and Toowoomba's getting new lights. The one that was mentioned in the McGrath review, which is probably unlikely to be action, would be night racing at Doomben as well too, Tim, which was interesting. I think that there was, the night racing thing's quite interesting. It's like Victoria is probably, and maybe because of Moonee Valley's rebuild, they maybe put it on hold a little bit, but there's also a bit of pushback from the industry around that. I noticed in the McGrath review, they said that, it was recommended that they finished after 9 o'clock local time, which is in summertime is 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. There probably a slight advantage there because that extra hour there was probably helped us a little bit. But that was due to the participant welfare and stuff like that. But night racing is an interesting discussion and probably something worth exploring a bit more. We might actually, in the next couple of weeks, look to do something a bit more on that. There was a whole bunch of other things. Obviously, you mentioned the key, probably newsworthy aspect of it was the recommendation, or the non-acceptance of the recommendation that point of consumption tax be cut from 20% to 15%. Queensland has the highest point of consumption tax rate of any state. ACT has a high one at 25%, but of the states, Queensland went to 20% in, I think it was December 2022. That has corresponded with, over rounds for Queensland racing being being higher than what they are in other states as well. And the bookies were pretty keen on seeing a change to this. They've lobbied quite heavily about it. When they didn't get the result going their way, they were quite outspoken. And what was interesting, we don't hear from Barney Evans that often, the Sportsbet CEO. Sportsbet, the biggest online bookmaker in Australia. He was quite strong on what he had to say, and it represents a significant missed opportunity for reignite investment and secure the future of racing in Queensland, was part of his statement there. So an interesting one from that perspective. Racing Queensland have got a lot of recommendations to act on there. They've got some interesting challenges themselves. This week was announced that Rebecca Frizzell, who's a prominent Gold Coast businesswoman, had stepped off the Racing Queensland board, which leaves them with 5 on the board. Steve Wilson left the board in October, the former chairman. They're currently looking to replace Steve, but also work out what the chair role looks like going forward. Obviously, they've got an interim/acting CEO in Lachlan Murray at the moment, who's been working hard to try to make that work up there. But for all these things they want to do, they probably need something in place, Tim, to ensure that they've got that worked out. And that may take, there's put it this way, Racing Queensland's got plenty on their plate at the moment, given, the outcomes of this review.
Glenn and Rebecca Frizzell will be a loss from what I got told. She is a shareholder in the Gold Coast Titans, and one of the recommendations from the McGrath report is to allow board members to have skin in the game, I guess, or own horses or dogs, which, there's all about conflict. But I think if you've got skin in the game and you own horses, you've got more of an understanding. I think that'll bring a greater diversity to the board and type of people that are heavily engaged in the industry.
Another recommendation was Racing Queensland to push for changes to Racing Australia's constitution in order to basically remove the veto that New South Wales and Victoria has over Racing Australia. As I said, Racing Queensland got plenty on their plate, so I'm not too sure that'll be number one item. But it was interesting to see that happen, and we saw change in that organisation. Well, not change, but an announcement. Well, actually, we didn't even see an announcement, Tim. We saw a leadership appointment in that organisation this week with a new chairman of Racing Australia, the first chairman they've had since March 2022.
Brorson's been elected to that chairmanship of the Racing Australia. He's also the RA representative on the Asian Pattent Committee and Asian Racing Federation. There's a lot going on there in the patent, as we know. So I guess it's sort of been a bit strange that they haven't had anyone for nearly 4 years since John Nassara was sort of brought in to try and bring all the PRAs together onto the same page, and he was unable to do it and resigned in frustration. And now they've sort of been not rudderless, but without a chairman, which has been unusual for that length of time. And hopefully Rob can bring them together and bring about meaningful change.
Yeah, hopefully Rob's empowered to actually put a public face forward too and actually talk about what's going on at RA, because as you and I know from personal experience, Tim, it's very difficult to find out what's going on within that organisation. There's an article in the Straight I urge you to have a look at about not necessarily criticism of Racing Australia, but the way that it's structured and the challenges that Australian racing faces because of a national body that's devoid of teeth and power, but given a lot of responsibility. So it's a difficult role that RA fulfills, and the structure doesn't really allow that to be, in our opinion, or my opinion, sorry, allow that to be sort of come forward. Just a quick one on the patent, Tim. We've spoken plenty of the last couple of weeks. What's the latest there? What are we expecting to hear out of that this week?
Well, there is a meeting of the Asian Racing Federation and Patent Committee on Friday in Hong Kong, I believe, and there definitely is. I'm not sure Racing Australia got a proposal over the line last week to actually take to that committee. Asian Patent Committee, I've been told, potentially could take matters into their own hands in the short term, but I think, pleasingly for the industry, I think something will be an agreement will be reached in time, but it might take till next year for a proper plan to be tabled and agreed to by all the parties, obviously Racing Australia, or whether there's an alternative push from outside Racing Australia that international authorities could accept. That would be a big move, but that's a possibility. So, there's been a lot of back and forth and arguments and disagreements. I think we're moving in the right direction. It's just a very slow process. And hopefully there isn't too much damage. It just depends what the Asian Patent Committee do on Friday. But I think whatever it is, whatever they agree to or come back with, I think hopefully it'll only be short term.
Just to round off on the racing wrap there, Tim, with news about Wentworth Park, the greyhound track in metropolitan Sydney. It will wind up in 2027, September 2027. The Drake report into the New South Wales Greyhound Racing and Greyhound Racing New South Wales was also released on the same day. Look, we try to keep ourselves focused on thoroughbred industry here, but these things happening in the other codes obviously affect the wagering industry, which we report a lot on, but also have, hallmarks of what's going on in the racing industry as well. So the broader thoroughbred racing industry. So there's plenty to talk about in that space and plenty going on there. And then we've also got the Tasmanian Parliament this week was set to pass the ban on greyhound racing for boarding from 2029, but that's been pushed back until March next year. So that political battle remains open for now. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. Inglis Premier Yearling Sale Catalogue is now available online. From March 1st to 3rd, Oaklands Junction in Melbourne will once again serve as the focal point of the bloodstock world, with 806 yearlings catalogue across 3 days of selling. This year's catalogue features progeny from 110 individual stallions, including leading sires I'm Invincible, Zoostar, Snitzel, Written Tycoon, and Extreme Choice, alongside internationally renowned names like Frankel, Kingman, and Lope de Vega. An exciting group of first season sides is also represented, including Animo, Artorias, Hitotsu, and Jacano. The Premier Sale has consistently produced racetrack success. Graduates include the past 3 winners of the Everest offered a public auction, Ballina Patina, Think About It, and Nature Strip, as well as 34 Group 1 winners since 2018, with 16 purchased for $100,000 or less. The English Premier Yearling Sale runs March 1 to 3 at Oaklands Junction, Melbourne. To view the catalogue, visit english.com.au. Tim, we'll cut now to an interview we did yesterday with Mark Newnham. We had a good chat with Mark Newnham, the now Hong Kong-based trainer, former jockey, former Australian trainer. And it was great to catch up with Mark and talk about how things are progressing with him in Hong Kong at the moment. And joining us now on Straight Talk is expat Australian trainer Mark Newnham, now plying his trade in Hong Kong, of course, leading the Trainers Premiership as we speak. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon, Bren. Good afternoon, Tim.
Let's get straight into it. Obviously, it's a big weekend for the stable and for you. My wish has been a flag bearer for you over the past season and a half. I think Tim's done a bit of research here, so I'll trust him on this. I was known as Like a Rider and trained by Steve Hodge at Newcastle before coming over there. I mean, how did you come to get that horse and sort of, how'd that come about, Mark?
One of my Sydney owners, Derek Tam, who's also been involved in a couple of horses here, he knew the ladies who were in the syndicate there, and he recommended me as a trainer. He looked at a couple of horses which he sent my way. I didn't think they were the ones suitable for here, and then he popped up with Like a Rider, and he asked me if I'd seen him, and I had. I thought his trial was impressive. I gave Steve Hodge a call, who I know. He's a trainer at Newcastle. And look, I think the only reservation on him was that he was small. And a lot of owners in Hong Kong won't buy a small horse. But look, the trial was good enough for me. Steve's recommendation was good enough. And I said, well, look, as far as I'm concerned, he's the right horse. And so they went and bought him, and it's been a very successful partnership.
Well, you've certainly been proven right thus far, and hopefully a Group 1's not far away, but he has won his first 2 starts back this season, Mark, and then he ran 4th last start in Group 2, but it was sort of a funny race, won by a roughie, wasn't it? There was, and I think he was 5 weeks between runs. What did you make of his effort?
Look, I thought he raced very well, considering, a few factors. I mean, always when they're $1.40, the expectation is that they'll win. And but look, I could see why he didn't. 5 weeks between runs is probably a bit much for him. There's nothing else on the program here to race him in between. And he'd had a trial and he'd had plenty of work, but he just raced a bit too fresh on a fast pace. Previously he's been able to absorb pressure on a fast pace as he did second up and still kick off that. But that was only on a 3-week turnaround, and he gets a 3-week turnaround this weekend.
How does the race sort of stack up this year? And particularly, how do the feel like the international sort of stack up to that? You've got the line in Winter for Aidan O'Brien. You've got Harry Eustace's Docklands, who we know from Australia. He's been racing well during the European season. I mean, how does that race sort of stack up this year compared to previous years, Mark?
Look, I think generally the Hong Kong horses dominate the mile race.
Yeah.
But look, a lot of that's been Golden 60 and Voyage Bubble, so they're very, very good horses. It's hard to get a line on the line in Winter. He's done a lot of travelling, but he has performed well, and he performed well at the Breeders' Cup meeting. Docklands has also done a lot of travelling, so you just wonder, them coming here now at the end of their season, whether they're still going to run to their best. Obviously, they're with very good trainers, so they expect them to, but Hong Kong horses are very hard to beat on their home soil, and I think they'll probably dominate the race.
As we sort of touched on in the introduction, Mark, you've had a good start to the season. You're currently, I think, 3 ahead in the Premiership, and we are talking before the Happy Valley meeting on Wednesday night. But you've sort of been building year on year in your 3rd season. What do you put that progression down to, and your momentum, I guess?
Oh, look, I think when you start here, you generally get, cast-offs from other stables. And as long as you get, a win or 2 out of those, then you can start building on your new horses and attracting clients with permits to bring in new horses. And then you've got to really rely on your selection process. And then they've got to get here and acclimatise. What may look the right horse form-wise, whether it be raced or trialled, doesn't always fit into Hong Kong. So temperament's a big thing. So I try and do a lot of homework before I make an approach on a horse, and try and take all the variables out of it. But still, once they get here, you're relying on them, acclimatising well. And sometimes that just takes time. Others settle in straight away. But, as long as you recruit well, I think, and a little bit patient, it'll work out most times.
Yeah, I mean, you speak about acclimatisation. I guess you had to do, when you moved over there, you had to do a bit of acclimatisation, coming to grips with new training facilities and how to train horses in Hong Kong. I mean, how have you seen your journey with that, Mark, in terms of, I guess, understanding how to get the best out of these horses, to continue them to keep at their peak, all that sort of stuff? When obviously training in places like Randwick and Warwick Farm is very different from our environment like Sha Tin or Chung Fa.
Yeah, well, in Australia, you can have a rotation of horses all year, and horses that don't, come up to at least provincial standard in Sydney. You can't afford to have them in your stable, training in town. So you can have a high turnover of horses, and that enables you to uncover horses, quickly, good horses quickly, just through the turnover. Whereas here, you've got to rely on being able to, get the best out of every horse, whether that be, a Class 5 win, or whether it be, in one of the group races. And once that horse is in your stable, you've got to work out a way to win with it, because the owner's already spent the money to get it here. And, sometimes it's patience. Sometimes they've just got limited ability. Sometimes they don't acclimatise or settle in. So I think it actually makes you a much better trainer, because you have to put a lot more thought into each horse, and analyse each little bit of a performance and try and find the positives out of that, and try and work a way forward to, to get those owners a win.
Does
And
that, I was
again, you
just going to say,
sort of
sorry, I was just going to say, Mark, is it helped by the sort of, I guess, the tempo of Hong Kong racing, that you're only racing twice a week, and you have that ability to sort of, I guess, focus on, I guess, game day for those 2 days a week, and you're not having to sort of look everywhere and work out where you're going to send horses? It's very much like, all right, this is the program, having that sort of limited set of races. Does that help you keep focus?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that it you've got more time and energy to put into each horse, because you're also not running a business. The jockey club, um, they employ all your staff, they bill all your owners. So really, your focus is on the horses and training winners. So it does give you more time to spend, thinking about placing each horse to its best. And even though the options are limited, we've only got the 2 tracks. Sometimes it's just a matter of, racing them to a level where they find their right rating. And you'll see horses that, they'll have 10 starts without doing anything, and then all of a sudden they hit a rating they're comfortable with, and they've acclimatised at the same time. I had a horse win on the weekend, not the silly one. I think it took him 9 starts to win when he first dropped to Class 5. And he won a race at the end of last season from barrier 1 over 1,000 metres at Happy Valley with Hugh Bowman, and he won by an inch. And you think, well, how am I going to win again with that horse? Well, this season we changed surfaces and moved him over to the dirt, and he's had 4 starts for 2 wins and a third and a fourth. So, we've managed to, maximise his potential. But now he'll be at a rating where he finds it difficult to win until he drops down again. But he's a nice sound horse. So, in 4 or 5 runs, he'll probably drop down to a rating where he's competitive.
in sourcing your horses for your stable, particularly from obviously Australia and New Zealand, when you were training in Sydney, you also traded a few horses to Hong Kong, I think. How much is that an advantage, and just knowing the way certain trainers train or prepare their horses, and what might be upside of barrier trials or races? How do you go about that?
Yeah, I watch a lot. I watch a lot of trials and I watch a lot of races. I do most of it myself. I mean, you get horses sent to you by a lot of agents. But I'm always watching trials, and even the day before a set of trials, I'll have a quick look through what's generally a 2 or 3 year old gelding, limited number of owners, because it's very difficult to buy syndicate horses. There's too many votes there and too many opinions. So I'm always looking for, the 3 year old gelding that's got, 1 or 2 owners, that may be viable. And then I watch the trials through the next morning. And if they've trialed well enough, I can just message the trainers and see if the horse is available for sale, and then work out a price after that. But I think, it is an advantage knowing how Sydney works, and what maybe look like a good trial, maybe a good trial, a good selling trial, because there's a few of those. You see the lightweight jockey from Barrier 1, leading easily and put 3 or 4 lengths on them, especially around
Yeah.
a track, the trial track at Rose Hill.
Yeah.
Horses can be easily flattered winning a 900-meter trial at Rose Hill by 4.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's those advantages knowing the system, but don't always get it right. But there's horses out there that we've been able to get for not a lot of money, and they've been successful.
Mark, I mean, if you look back across, you've been training for, I think, roughly 10 years now. It's not a long period to be in the game. Have you been surprised sort of the way that it's gone and the way that it's sort of taken off? And obviously going to Hong Kong, is an enormous opportunity. I I guess, are you surprised by how that's developed? And also, I guess, how do you build on that? How do you build on that if this is going to be a career for another 15, 20 years? How do you continue to build on that, do you feel?
Yeah, look, it's been a rapid journey. I started about the middle of 2016,
Yeah.
and look, I had, after I started training, I did have sights set on coming to Hong Kong, but that's a lot of trainers. You've got to get the runs on the board to put yourself out there, and it. I didn't think it would come along quickly, but look, we managed to get going in Sydney fairly quickly. But I think it was about the 4th year I was training. I got up to 4th on the premiership, and really I'd gone as far as I could go. I didn't think I could get any higher than that because of numbers. And during COVID, I ended up closing the Warwick Farm stable. There was a period there where we had local government lockdown areas, and there was about 3 months I couldn't go to the stable at Warwick Farm. And at that time, I had 30 horses at Warwick Farm and 40 at Randwick, and it just became unsustainable. And it did look, I couldn't run it properly. So I culled that, and then we had a poor year the next year, and that was just, I probably held on to too many horses, and was trying to squeeze, still probably trying to squeeze 60 horses into 40 boxes at Randwick. So I wasn't giving them the time they needed. ATC had promised me more stabling, but it only got up to 50, and that's what I did the last couple of years with, and we got well back on track. And we're always running 5th or 6th that last couple of years, and the opportunity came up to come here, and I thought all along, this is what I wanted to do. These are the numbers I like. The Jockey Club take away the parts of training I don't enjoy. Running a business, employing staff, selling down yearlings. It's not something I'm good at. I'm a poor salesman. So here, results is what counts. And once you get going here, owners are pretty willing to support you, and really, owners are pretty willing to support you initially as well, because they find it difficult to get into the top 5 or 6 stables because they're always full. So the cap at 70 makes that that knock-on effect down to the trainers, either the new trainers coming in to the roster, or the trainers sort of at mid-level. So, quite a few owners were willing to back me, and some of those owners I did have in Sydney. And once you start getting things on a roll, it just sort of puts you up up in people's minds as it would anywhere.
Hong Kong International Week market's a big destination for a lot of racing people, and I think I think you used to go there as a sort of almost your annual leave, but how different is it now that you're actually training there as opposed to sleeping in and being able to enjoy the nightlife, I guess?
Yeah, it's a lot harder. Yeah, like it. There's a couple of nights that I'll just miss this week, just so I get enough sleep and can do my job. But yeah, I used to come here each year, my wife and I, and really enjoyed the week. And I don't know anyone that ever comes here once. It's people who ask and used to come with us. Once they've been once and had such a good time for the week that is, they generally come back.
Mark, Tim actually wanted me to ask this question on his behalf. He's very, very interested in the progress of Invincible Ibis and what's next for that horse. I believe somewhere in the background, Tim, you might have been involved somewhere in that horse, but yeah, interested in the progress on that horse.
Yeah, he trialled yesterday and runs on the 20th. He steps up to a mile. Zach's sticking with him, so that's always a good guide. A little bit of confidence there from Zach, but I'm hoping that he'll make the 4-year-old series this season. So that's his goal. That's My Wish competed in those races last year, and he's had quite similar form at this stage. Difference being My Wish has continued to improve, but Invincible Ibis is open to the same improvement. I just hope we get there.
Yeah, I just for a bit of background there. Tim was half keen to pull the dam back out of retirement earlier this year to get her back. On the basis this horse might go pretty good, so it might be good for the mare to be back in service next year, given what Tim told me before.
Yeah, no, I think
Awesome.
if she visited Hellbent again, he wouldn't be disappointed.
Exactly. Maybe I'll put that to my fellow owners. There was we're certainly not a tipping show, Mark, but I did notice one yesterday at Wagga. Caught 4 and 5 wide the trip, first start, called under wraps. I thought it was a pretty good run. I know it was started odds on, but should we continue to follow that horse?
Oh, well, he's going for a spell. He's owned by my wife. Look, the plan was he would win and then probably be sold here. But it might be plan B now. He might be a highway horse for Danny to keep racing next season. But he'll go for a break. I think, talking to Danny last night, it was just a bit all too much for him. He's been very mentally immature. He was ready to go at Albury a couple of weeks ago and just got his foot caught up in the barrier and was scratched. And yesterday I was worried when he didn't want to load, and it's never a good sign for a young horse. And look, he raced accordingly. He had a tough run, but we expected more.
Only Tim could turn a discussion about Hong Kong International Week into a Wagga Maiden discussion. Mark, I'll leave that alone. Thank you so much for your time, mate. Really great to catch up. And yeah, it sounds like things are going very well for you at the moment. Obviously, great start to the season, and may well the momentum continue.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, guys.
Appreciate it. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. It's been another big spring for Darley Stallions, with their progeny delivering right across the carnival. In total, 38 stakes races were won, everything from those sharp early 2-year-olds through to the major Group 1. And while the Godolphin racing team certainly played their part, it was the client-bred horses who really filled the sheet. They accounted for 26 of those 38 stakes wins. 4 Darley Stallions produced Group 1 winners this spring, spanning the whole range from 1,200 to 2,500 metres. Street Pross, Too Darn Hot, Harry Angel and Gayeth all had multiple stakes winners across the carnival. Too Darn Hot's pre-Christmas 2-year-olds were flying again, taking out both the Jim Crack and the Darley Run on Plate. And Bivouac notched his first Group 1 winner, Baywatch, who broke the track record in the Golden Rose with a rating of 108. Bred well, buy well, win well, Darley. Right, on to breeding now, Tim, and so I highlighted earlier this week in our Run the Numbers columns the achievement of Bob Peters. Now, we talk a lot about Bob Peters, or we have talked a lot about Bob Peters across the journey. It's a remarkable record in WA. I think the people don't realise, like I put the article the other day that he's won more Northerly Stakes now, thank the Cosmic Crusaders victory on the weekend, than Lloyd Williams has Melbourne Cups. But the added thing for Bob is he's bred all 7 of, well, there's 7 winners of those eight editions, bred those 7 horses. It's remarkable that the success that he's had breeding horses, both from WA, but also utilising Eastern State stallions. Yeah, it's amazing to see, and something that needs to be acknowledged for the fact that someone could be based in WA, which is separate from a lot of the rest of Australia in many ways, but to be able to be as successful as he has been.
He's done it. Bob is just to breed some very, very good horses. Obviously, eight winners in the one race, and there's not many Group 1 opportunities in WA, obviously, as we know, only 3 at the moment. But he's tied himself to certainly the last decade or two to the eastern states, particularly Arrowfield and Coolmore and their stallions, and benefited greatly out of that. Obviously, Saturday's winners by Morris, and I think the mare went 7 times to that same stallion, I think you said. So it's for me is what interesting to come from Bob Peters. Obviously, he's in his 80s now, but he's got his grandson Liam sort of leading the way there with a young trainer Michael Grantham doing a good job, trained that Cosmic Crusader, and they did have a winner yesterday at Ascot, an extreme choice filly 2 from 2, which is they bought out of the classic sale, or Liam did, for 200,000, called Like Clockwork. A little bit. It wouldn't be the normal horse that Bob would have gone for. He likes to stay as middle distance horses to go on to win the Northerlies and the Railways and things like that. But just probably different generation and different ideas from Liam bringing in, and that filly looks very, very talented 2 from 2, and hopefully the Peters investments can go on for many years to come.
Yeah, and if you go back through Bob's history, he has bought horses at auction. About 20, 25 years ago, he went through a period of buying fillies, bringing them through, and then going and breeding with them. And these are the champion families we're seeing now sort of come through. And it was actually interesting looking back through the pedigree of Cosmic Crusader. And I'm not necessarily one who goes back 200 years to see where the pedigrees come from, but I kept on going back through stud book, Tim, and it kept on saying Australia, 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 Australia. Cosmic Crusader himself was bred in New Zealand because of anyway. There's a couple of factors there, but last 19 dams were bred in Australia, going back to 1818 or 1817 or something. It's quite interesting. You've got, it shows how Bob thinks that you've got Morris, who came out here in 2017 for the first time as a shuttle stallion, and you've got a mare whose family have been in Australia for 200 years, and they're combined to create a very promising and progressive Group 1 winner. And again, not a 3-year-old, but actually a 5-year-old, a horse that they've patiently sort of worked through. And as we know, Bob's had his share of trainers across the year and his share of opinions, and he's obviously got strong ideas, and he had a quite publicised, parting the ways with Grant and Alana Williams after so much success. This was his first Group 1 winner since, I think, 2022. Am I right, Tim? So it's been a while, I guess, between drinks, but he's I just thought it's worth acknowledging what he's been able to achieve, and not just in WA, because he has had significant success on the eastern seaboard as well. Speaking of success, the Aushorse Investors Guide came out this week, Tim, and it's always an interesting read just to sort of pull out those key figures. Obviously, it's meant to promote Australian racing. It is a marketing exercise, and Aushorse are a marketing company. So, obviously you have to take it from a marketing perspective, but it certainly casts Australia in a very positive light in terms of, as an attractive destination for investment for those from overseas, but also for those within Australia as well.
Yeah, I think, obviously, as we've discussed ad nauseum, there's a lot going on in the industry with the patent and different things like that. But if you look at the pure numbers and the prize money increases over the last decade, sort of led by Racing New South Wales and Victoria below that, there's the returns on investment that you can achieve in Australia are much better than pretty much every other open jurisdiction. There's Japan and obviously Hong Kong, but you need permits. It's not that easy to own a horse. But in Australia, pretty much everyone can own a horse if they wish to, and you've got the bank to do it. And they promote that you can get by nice yearlings. The majority of yearlings are put to sales, whereas in Europe there's a lot of owner breeders, and the best bred are retained to race and breed with. So the opportunities are there to trade, and there's some big international investors in the Australian market, like the Yearlongs, the Coolmores, the Darleys, that spur that market or that bloodstock economy to get a return, and and have a great time as well. And we've seen some Americans invest down here and always looking for the next one. That's Aushorse's job.
Yeah, exactly right. And obviously Hong Kong investment's a key part of that as well. And we spoke to Mark Newnham before about Hong Kong and sort of where things sit there at the moment. It's obviously such a key market for, Asian export, what Australia's trying to do. And I mean, it's important that you acknowledge, the positive aspects of Australian racing. It's a really, strong industry. We don't have an industry without that strong commercial bent to it. It's really important to have that. But yeah, it's always an interesting document because it does give you comparison year to year about where things are trending as well. And review it within that. The other thing I sort of want to pull out from a bloodstock point of view, Tim, it's catalogue season. We've been pretty much inundated for the last 4 weeks or 5 weeks with catalogue releases. It's always exciting to see the new batch of horses coming through. We had the English Premier catalogue come out this week. English released their Easter preview. Magic Millions released their Tasmanian catalogue, something obviously of particular local interest to me to have a look through to see what horses are there because I've got a strong interest in the Tasmanian breeding scene. But it's the time of year where we get a view about what the 2026 yearling sale might look like. And it's hard to get a view because there's so many horses. But it's interesting, I guess, what the bloodstock companies and what the sales companies are pulling out and promoting around this stuff.
Yeah, well, just on that, I think Perth might be coming out this week or next as well for Magic Millions. But yeah, for me, the catalogues, what's interesting is which vendors support which sales or where they've, because placement is such an important part of selling a horse. You can have a nice horse, but if you sort of, because you do get compared like for like. So if you're at Magic Millions in January and you're the 30th best Zoo Star in people's eyes, you probably could have been better off placed elsewhere. That's the juggling act of trying to work that out or holding back to Easter and then, falling out through the cracks. And Melbourne Premier was very strong last year for trade horse. So if you've got a nice colt, Premier really comes into calculation. So, but, paper's one thing, seeing them is another. As we know, conformation and physique tells the horse just as much as pedigree, it seems these days. Pedigree just works out the price, but conformation's not there. You find it very difficult to sell.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually had a friend of mine messaged me yesterday to say, I've got a mate who's got a horse in the Magic Million sale. I'm Invincible filly. He goes, what do you think it'll sell for? And I'm like, mate, I'm just looking at the pedigree. I'd be absolutely throwing a dart. No idea. It's very hard to actually work out what they sit for. I know you and I have played the game before where we try to predict prices of horses, but there's so many factors that go into it. If a horse is, judged by the sales company to be good enough to get into those sales, we know that it probably sits within the top, 20 to 30% of yearlings by that sire. But it's not always as straightforward as that. You can sit through and have a champion sire with a Group 1 winner as a mare, and it doesn't always do as well as you think it will. Yet another horse whose pedigree doesn't look quite as replete with black type, we'll go the other way around. So we go back to the sales again next year, Tim. We're constantly despite the fact that you and I have been to so many of them over the years, there's always plenty of surprises there and plenty of things that sort of getting us through. I'll move on to wagering now, Tim, and just a brief chat around about an article which I put up today, which is just around the relationship between gambling and racing. It's a really interesting one based upon this concept. We heard this week that racing in British Columbia, effectively Vancouver in Canada, will be winding up or has wound up. Hastings Park there will shut because the local government has sort of changed the funding agreement. Previously, sort of I think about $10 million Canadian from the local casino operations was funneled back into racing to support racing, and that's no longer happening. We've got a situation in Florida, which I've explored in the article as well, where you've got the suggestions there might be decoupling legislation put forward, which will basically remove that relationship between casino funding or the need to operate live racing next to casinos. So that's probably the best way to describe it. We've got the UK situation whereby racing escaped a racing tax, but the other aspects of the gambling industry, including sports betting, but particularly online casino betting, was hit significantly. And the reaction of the gambling companies is pretty much we're going to cut back investment in racing, which seems a bit odd, but it's all part of the same system. In Australia, we've got wagering very much a key part of it. We spoke before about the bookies' reaction to the Queensland Racing Review. It's an interesting one for racing to balance. And I'm not saying that there's a solution to this, but for me, racing has got to a broader challenge about the role that gambling plays and that wagering funds it, but then also the government administrates what goes on with racing, particularly in Australia. And I think it speaks to a broader challenge that racing's got to, that it needs wagering in order to continue to grow and develop and sustain prize money, but it also needs to have that social license and that import around that. So it's a sort of inherent tension with how racing works. I mean, yeah, you and I, know that racing is a gambling sport. It's a sport that involves having a bet, and that's what's engaged us over the years, Tim. We've got involved in other ends, but we're all guys that probably came into racing with an interest in having a bet and developed their understanding elsewhere. But it's just, for me, it's interesting how that role sort of is slightly different in each jurisdiction, but there's a theme there that, racing's reliance on wagering or on gambling in the case of the UK, so US and Canadian examples, probably points to something, that have to be cognizant of, because if you rely constantly upon third parties in order to fund your sport, you have to find other ways. And it harks back to what the ATC have been talking about, ways to try to find the way forward. We spoke to Steve McMahon last week. Being totally reliant on those models can have its faults.
It's hard to ignore. PRAs the industry can't ignore the fact that it is racing. And I think they do walk that tightrope even in just general dealing with governments and trying to, focus on the entertainment value and away from the gambling. But as we know, sort of 90% of the revenue plus comes from wagering, as Lachlan Murray said in an article with me last week. I think we've seen with, I'll use this example, it's not in your story, but the Singapore, the demise of that racing jurisdiction probably started with the casinos sort of in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I think. And they just slowly slid down, and the government realised they didn't need the racing tax revenue anymore. And so I think it is said the PRAs have to promote the gambling side of it a little bit more, but also the employment and the other benefits of the industry, which they do very well and highlight. But it's just a matter of, probably I'm saying a lot of things without saying much at all, but the government, the relationship with government is key, and keeping them on side, constantly, talking to those people is important. When you think it's going well, just keep reinforcing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is that there's this definition or this difference between gambling and wagering that you and I probably see, every day, and have understand the notion that betting on a horse race is different than rolling dice at a craps table or roulette wheel or whatever else you're going to do. There's a difference there, running a pokie machine, whatever else it is. But the broader public doesn't necessarily see that, Tim. And so, that's part of the challenge that racing's got in terms of social license, to convince people that this is a different type of activity. But the more that it's sort of embedded within that, it's a little bit different within Australia than overseas. But you can see in here with this casino situation, whereby 20 years ago in Canada, they said, let's utilise the casino revenue in order to back up what's going on in the racing. And then all the racing punters went to the casino, and they've got nobody paying on racing. So you've just got to be careful of those long-term decisions. We spoke before about the importance of long-term decisions, and reference to Bob Peters making a decision 25 years ago on breeding. It's no different than the strategy of racing. And the danger is you make a decision now which might actually impact something longer term. But anyway, it's an interesting time in racing, and I thought it was something worth reflecting on. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by Darley and Inglis. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and also don't be scared to become a member of the Straight. Available there. If you use the early member 2 code, you can get $20 off our annual subscription. Annual subscription is $199, back to $179 with a discount, and $19 per month. Send us an email, editor@thestraight.com.au. We've got probably one more podcast coming this year, Tim, given Christmas is only a couple of weeks away, but happy to chat through any interview issues you might want to go through. And we'll talk to you again next week.